Okay, let's recap our analysis and our recommendations for Birch Paper Company. If you recall, we were trying to help Mr. Kenton decide upon which bid he should accept. And in trying to arrive at that decision, we had to contrast what might be in the best interest of Mr. Kenton and what would be in the best interest of Birch Paper Company and its shareholders overall. And then the other complicating issue was our recommendations as to whether the commercial vice president should intervene, should take Mr. Kenton and Mr. Bruner aside, and perhaps even the head of the Southern Division aside, and intervene in some fashion with the transfer prices that these three divisions are attempting to charge one another. One of the things that we tried to dig into to help out with this decision is first take a look at what were the relevant costs to Birch and also to each of the divisions that might help us understand this decision and be able to advise. And a parallel with that was, what are the incremental contributions from each of the alternatives? Again, looking at it from Birch Paper Company and also trying to get inside each of those division managers' worlds and see what the contribution impact was to them individually. So we started with a view of the overall deal at a glance. And we can zoom in on this here as a reminder of what's going on here. Remember, we did have the three alternatives: $430 from West, $432 from Erie, and an astounding and troubling $480 from our companions in the Thompson division. Now, this value chain got a bit complicated because the Thompson division was buying from our own Southern division. Erie Papers was buying both from Thompson and our Southern division. And so we had to begin to take apart the cash flows and look at costs and look at contributions. So with the information in the case, it should have been possible fairly quickly to figure out what went into these question mark cost numbers. The key here was the general gross margins that Birch asked each of their divisions to manage to. Okay, with this view of the deal, then we can go ahead and look at individual costs. Again, we have the three deals arrayed across in columns, and the top half of this analysis looks at the costs to the divisions and total to Birch. The bottom looks at the contributions. Now, when we zoom in here again, and many of you did some good work on this, we can see that either the cost approach or the contribution approach leads us to the view that it's better to do this deal in-house. Buying from Thompson has total out-of-pocket costs to Birch of $288,000. Even though the prices are lower, particularly from West and also from Erie, the out-of-pocket cost, because of the multiple division internal transfers, the out-of-pocket costs are less if we buy from our sister division, Thompson. And similarly, this should be no surprise, similarly, the contribution for Birch as a whole is highest if we buy from our sister division at Thompson. So armed with this view of costs and contributions, we generally find most of us move immediately from buying from the lowest cost provider to buying from our own Thompson division. For all of these reasons, lowest overall cost to the company and highest contributions. But yet, there may be more here. We then began to try and get inside the minds of these division general managers. And remember, Birch has given them a lot of power, a lot of discretion over how they're managing their divisions. They're certainly profit centers and probably even investment centers. They're, in a sense, CEOs of their own division. The only thing that's really missing are sort of the corporate overhead functions, like raising capital, a legal department, a personnel department. So they are, other than that, they're basically running these divisions as if they were CEOs. In fact, we might say maybe Birch's intention is that Mr. Brunner and Mr. Kenton are perhaps CEOs in training for Birch as a whole. They're certainly getting a taste of what it's like to be a CEO. Now, if we get inside of Mr. Brunner's world at the Thompson division, what we're trying to understand is if this is a smart guy, and we should assume that he is if he's been given the position of running this large division. If he's a smart guy, can't he do those numbers we just did? Can't he see the overall costs and contributions to Birch? It probably wouldn't take him very long if he were a graduate of the Portland State University School of Business Administration. So we can assume he can do that, but what else might be going on in his division that's leading him away from this lowest cost or highest contribution decision? Well, when we really dig into the case, and many of you picked up on this, it took a little bit of prompting on my part, but many of you picked up on the fact that Mr. Brunner is off on a strategic realignment in the Thompson division. He's on a mission to make this division more than simply a commodity carton division. He's invested a fair amount of money, R&D, product development, in trying to reposition Thompson as a value-added carton supplier. In fact, he even did some work with the Southern Division, developing some special carton characteristics. So Mr. Brunner would certainly like to recover the cost of some of that investment, but also we're told that he's actively trying to reposition the division, and we can assume that he's chasing sales, chasing value-added sales. And we're also told that occasionally the Thompson division is running at full capacity. Occasionally they're not. So they're starting to get it together, it looks like. Now, one of the things we may be dealing with here is Mr. Brunner has been out chasing high-value business. Maybe his director of sales is right on the tail, almost ready to close a significant deal at a price of $480. Now Mr. Brunner has a dilemma. If he's forced to bid and accept this business internally at $430, would that then displace his capacity to take the presumed $480 business from outside customers and in effect not be able to pursue his strategy of moving the division in a value-added direction? Well, we don't know, but there's some evidence in the case that that might be underway. In which case, the decision to to bid at $430 and sell these cartons internally turns out to be not just a one-off decision. It's not just a single transaction for these cartons. It turns out to be perhaps a division that has strategic implications going forward. And wouldn't Birch Paper Company itself be better served by the Thompson division moving into a higher value-added, higher contribution segment of the market, presumably? So this may be going on, and we have some indications there that it could be. Now, with that as backdrop, we realize we have a commercial vice president, and should we recommend that VP intervene? It's pretty complicated because the vice president is asking the division managers to act like CEOs. And the vice president can see all of these contributions that we've seen. The complication comes in to his decision to how specifically to adjust these transfer prices. Should he simply tell Mr. Bruner to sell at $4.30? Should he go down to the Southern division manager and say, wait a minute, you're charging way too much for this commodity, liner board and medium. Maybe it's the Southern division that should lower their price. Or maybe there's some sort of equitable way to divide up the overall contribution pie amongst the three divisions. It gets really complicated. And also, it goes against the strategic intent that Birch had to force all internal transactions to occur at market clearing prices. Why did they do that? Because of the discipline the market enforces on the individual divisions. Now, if we take a longer-term view, really step back and say, what is Birch Paper Company trying to do besides, one, book a profit on individual orders or execute individual orders at the least cost? Two, reposition one or more of their divisions as value-added rather than mere commodity divisions. Or three, groom potential future CEOs for Birch Paper Company. And on that third potential intent for Birch, what's going to happen if commercial vice presidents begin to intervene in the business of these individual division general managers that are trying to build their business, trying to position themselves as perhaps future CEOs capable of running the company? How are those high potential division managers going to react if they're second guessed at every turn by a commercial vice president, essentially saying, nice try, but you got to take one for the company here? You see, there are a lot of implications here. And the right answer here kind of depends on how we interpret all of the overall factors that are impacting it. The deal, the repositioning of a division, and the grooming of future high potential CEO talents. I think this case, for many of us, surprised us. It seemed simple, it got more complicated, and really there was more here than initially met the eye. Thanks for your participation and for your recommendations.